Let's start with the news. Yesterday, Eric Adams, the incumbent mayor of New York City, who had been running an independent bid to get reelected, dropped out of the race. I want to get thoughts of both of you about how this reshapes the race, if at all, or if Zoran Mamdani is still essentially a shoo-in. Mark, if we could start with you.
Look, this is a necessary but not sufficient condition to change the race. If the election doesn't change in any fundamental way, there's about 100% Mamdani will win. However, I think people are too glibly and blithely saying too little, too late in terms of this change in the race, because there's still two debates to come. And if the moderators do what moderators normally do, they'll ask the front runner a lot of hard questions. And he's not answered hard questions very well lately. He's great at making videos with kissing people on the street and salsa dancing and riding the subway. He's great at that, but he's not great at defending his most unpopular positions. And I've seen some survey data that suggests a lot of people don't know about his most unpopular positions. And between negative advertising and the debates, I think it's too quick to say the chances are 100. I think they're 80% he's going to win, but they're not 100 with 5 weeks to go, and particularly the debates still pending.
He has survived several debates when he was competing for the Democratic nomination, which he then won. But you don't think the questioning there
He wasn't the front runner, and they weren't focusing all the questions on him. And if you look at the interviews he's done of late, he's not handled relatively easy questions on topics that are hard, but relatively easy questions. He's not handled them well. If the debate moderators ask the right questions in a tough way, and Cuomo is prepared to highlight his opponent's unpopular positions, I think you'd see the race change dramatically. If the Republican candidate, Mr. Sliwa's vote total goes down below 7%, and so the other two are competing for 93% of the vote, I don't think he's ahead by 15 points. I'm not even sure he's ahead by 8 points, Mamdani. And can Cuomo cut an 8-point gap with a turnout operation? Sure.
Sliwa, I think, to give him his due, he's run a pretty good campaign so far. He has a cult following in New York, and he's polling not that far away from Cuomo in most polls. He's polling around 20-22%. It would seem like he would need to. I mean, what are the conditions in which he just goes away? I'm going to put that to Joe Nocera.
Putting that to me is a huge mistake, because Mark's the expert, and
Joe, you know a lot of things. You're an encyclopedia.
Not on New York City politics, I'm afraid. I mean, I basically think, but this is purely from my gut, that New Yorkers really don't want anything to do with Andrew Cuomo. I would be shocked if he won. And looking ahead, which is kind of what I care about more, which is governing more than the election, I continue to believe that being a mayor, all the stuff that he says he's going to do, he's not going to be able to do. He will be constrained by budgetary reasons. He will be constrained by political reasons, but he'll also be constrained by the reality of being a mayor. So I may be the only person at the Free Press who stands by calmly at the prospect of Mamdani being the mayor.
Couldn't agree
Mayor
more.
can still do a lot of damage, however. Joe, you were around for John Lindsay. You can.
I was not around. I was not around for John Lindsay. I believe I lived in Boston at the time.
All right, but you were a contemporary of John Lindsay, we can say. Anyway, you can see how mayors do. It's true, they're constrained by Washington, they're constrained by Albany, but mayors do have a lot of effect on the city. And Mark, I want to go back to you for a second, because you were talking about his unpopular positions, his weak points. What are the key weak points that New York voters don't really realize about Mamdani that could be brought up in a debate?
I think a lot of them relate to crime, and a lot of them relate to economics, two big issues in the city. I'm a student of the dynamic here, which is Andrew Cuomo cannot win the race unless Mamdani is disqualified for a lot of voters. George W. Bush won re-election when the numbers didn't suggest he could. How? He disqualified John Kerry as an acceptable choice. And for a lot of, even a heavily Democratic and largely liberal city, Mamdani has a lot of positions that for voters, if they learn about them, will be disqualifying. So how do voters learn about that? They learn about it through the debates, through advertising, through news coverage. Cuomo's not done a very good job of publicizing those positions. He's begun to try, but the press has some cognitive dissonance. This is, I think, the biggest problem people have for beating Mondami, the business community, and others who want to beat him. If his positions, this is in quotes, if his positions are so horrible, how did he get the Democratic nomination? And the answer is because they weren't publicized during that process, including in the primary debates. But it's a little embarrassing for the press to suddenly say, oh my goodness, if these positions are so of interest to so many voters, we probably should have told them about him before. And the press doesn't like to admit that implicitly or explicitly. So that's to me the biggest obstacle those who wish to beat Mondami have. I'll just say two things again. He's the overwhelming favorite to win. I don't want to be misunderstood. I just think it's not a lock. And I'm in Joe's camp on this. I have faith in the city that a mayor is not going to destroy the city, however liberal his positions are. I think he might be an inspirational leader. He's a very charismatic guy. I'm not endorsing his positions. I'm not rooting for him to win. I'm not predicting he'll definitely win. I'm just saying I think people shouldn't be of a sky is falling attitude. And Kathy Wild, who runs the big business group here in New York, on Squawk Box this morning, basically said that. She said, the city's stronger than any individual mayor, no matter what that person's policies.
Yeah, the business community seems to be at least making some sort of attempt to bring Zoran sort of into their camp, or at least have a good relationship with him. They seem to kind of assume that he's a shoo-in. Again, 80%, let's just give that as his odds. But you do see outreach from the Mamdani camp. You see outreach from various power brokers in the city back to Mamdani. Obviously, he's run a very good campaign. He's a very young man. He hasn't done a lot, but I mean, his campaign has been absolutely extraordinary. And, that is his message. I've run such a good campaign. Of course, I can run New York City. These are very different things, but it speaks in his favor that he was able to come from being a tremendous underdog to winning the Democratic nomination to begin with. And I think he's handled himself rather well in terms of separating himself from Democratic Socialists of America positions, DSA positions, trying to create a little bit of distance there, trying to create a little bit of distance from his old abolish the police, legalize prostitution kind of policies. And, as Lincoln said, power reveals. So we might find out what's going on there exactly. I want to talk about that's one election. It's getting a lot of attention because it's New York City. But there are two other marquee elections that we have coming up. We have New Jersey selecting a new governor, and we have Virginia selecting a new governor. Mark, I want to get your thoughts on both of those races. And I also want to just get your thoughts on if Democrats just run the table here. The Democrats are obviously a demoralized party in many different ways. Nobody really wants to call themselves a Democrat right now. Moderates are upset with the party. Progressives are upset with the party. But if you get into a position where there's just this clean sweep, where they win the governor's mansion, they keep hold of the governor's mansion in New Jersey, they flip Virginia, they win in New York City, would that just be a shot in the arm for Democrats? Would they start saying it's like, all right, we can do this? Are there lessons they can learn from these victories?
Well, look, those are three blue jurisdictions. And historically, with few exceptions, the newly elected president's party loses those two governorships. So if you're looking at historical data, it shouldn't really be that much of a shot in the arm. Plus, the Republican candidates in all three races are pretty weak, although Jack in New Jersey is proven to be a better candidate than people had suspected. I think the opposite is true, which is to say, if they lose any of them, it will be whatever the opposite of a shot in the arm is. Well, what's the right metaphor for that?
Another demoralizing experience. I'm not sure what the metaphor is.
Why is the metaphor a shot in the arm? Shot in the arm is painful.
You know what? I don't actually know the origin of that. Joe Nocera, you want to weigh in?
I don't, but as somebody who has been taking allergy shots since he was 4 years old, or began taking when I was 4 years old, I would say that was a shot in the arm for me.
Yeah. Joe, is the metaphor come from your experience getting shots? Because
I think so. I think my mother created it.
I don't know. Whatever the opposite shot in the arm is, if they lose any of those races, it'll be bad for them, and they could lose New Jersey.
Right.
But
yeah.
But
the opposite
also,
of a shot in the arm is a kick in the ass.
There you go, kick in the ass. I still want to know why it's called a shot in the arm. The two candidates, Sherrill in New Jersey and Spanberger in Virginia, will both, if they win, be talked about as potential presidential or vice presidential candidates. And they're both relatively moderate compared to the far left of the Democratic Party. And so it'll be a sign that if the Democrats, the lesson people will take away from it is if the Democrats nominate moderate women with both of whom have national security experience, the party can do better. But again, winning in very historically very blue New Jersey and somewhat blue Virginia, and in Virginia the Republican candidate's a very weak candidate. It's not that big a deal. Ain't nothing and better than the alternative, but not that big a deal.
It's Jack. I always hesitate to pronounce his last name, but Jack Ciattarelli, I believe.
Ciattarelli.
Yes,
Yeah.
Ciattarelli.
Good Jersey name. I'd buy a condo from him. I'd let him sell me my bail bond, whatever.
You heard it here first. Mark Halperin has endorsed Jack Ciattarelli.
No, I endorsed his name. I like his
Yeah.
name. I was in Jersey yesterday on the boardwalk, and there were a lot of signs for him around, and I felt everybody there. Both two things were true about all the men. They could have been named Jack, and they had tattoos.
He ran 4 years ago. He overperformed expectations. We have a situation right now. I think Emerson just came out with a poll that has them basically in a dead heat right now. Why is that? New Jersey, again, deep blue. The last time they voted Republican, I believe, would be probably 84. Long history of Democratic governors and very moderate Republican governors like Christy Todd Whitman. Why is it right now that in this moment we have a president who's just been elected, as you said, we have a Republican White House incumbent. Democrats should be energized. They should have that race locked up. Why don't they? And is that a weakness of the candidate? Does that have something with the New York media market that takes up a good chunk of New Jersey and all of the coverage of Mamdani? Is that part of it? What's going on in New Jersey? Why are Democrats seemingly faltering there?
Is that for me?
Yes.
It has to be because I don't know anything about this stuff.
Okay. So I normally say three reasons, but in this case I'll say four. First of all, it's a populist moment for the Republican Party and independents, right? If you have to choose establishment or populist right now, you go with populist. And Jack is a populist. He's a regular guy. He talks like a normal person. His name is Jack. So that's one. Number two is it's a state that has got a very high sensitivity to taxes, right? It's a very high tax state. And when Republicans like Chris Christie and Christy Todd Whitman have won the governorship, even as it's been largely a blue state, and Reagan won it, it's when they put taxes and cost of living front and center, and the Republican Jack has done that. Three is she has been a very unsure-footed candidate. She has done poorly in some interviews. She's not as well known as people had thought, and she's not been super great. And then I think the news flow has benefited the Republicans, which is to say, crime, immigration, quality of life. Those things get a lot of attention in the New York and Philadelphia media markets, which are the two big media markets for Jersey. So I think if you look at sort of what's been in the news lately, it's been stuff that's better for him than it has been for her.
We're going to talk about the indictment of FBI Director James Comey on perjury charges, I believe, in the Eastern District of Virginia. This has been celebrated by MAGA folks. This has been something that the president has long promised to do. He's going through with it right now. But we're seeing a lot of pushback from sort of the establishment right. Andrew McCarthy in National Review just described this as indictment is just completely ridiculous. He said it should be thrown out. Mark, you said that any American that cares about the abuse of power by the president should be outraged. Mark,
Yeah.
is this the sort of thing, first of all, just from a legal standpoint, let's say this just gets thrown out. Does that just energize MAGA? And B, this seems, again, the president testing the limits of his authority, something that he has done throughout his two terms.
Yeah.
He
didn't.
Yeah.
No, you go. Sorry.
No, just we can't talk about humbling Donald Trump because that's never going to happen. But terms of if this just gets pushed back, if this gets pushed back from the courts, does the administration learn anything from that? Or do they just go into overdrive and try to indict Hillary Clinton on whatever?
Well, there's lots of strands there. I think Donald Trump did not invent lawfare, but he certainly loves it. And he certainly, one of the things about Trump that I pointed out before is he's a student of history more than people understand. And he looks at what's been done previous to him by other presidents. And his attitude is, I'm going to do at least that and maybe a little bit more. I'm not going to be the sucker who doesn't use the Justice Department for my own political ends because Nixon did it and Johnson did it, right? So, and he would say, well, Biden did it. So, uh, uh, I don't like lawfare, and I don't like selective prosecution, and I don't like political prosecutions. So when I criticize Donald Trump for indicting Jim Comey, it's not because I'm a big fan of Jim Comey, because I'm actually not. I think he's one of the most overrated people in modern American history. And it's not because I don't think lawfare was practiced against Republicans, including against Donald Trump. I just don't like it when anybody does it. I think the indictment is weak. I predict they'll do some superseding indictment to try to make it a little bit more solid. And I doubt if they don't do that, I doubt the case will survive. I think it'll be thrown out. And I think they'll continue to do lawfare. And I think the president will continue to have his list of people he wants indicted. And I think he'll do his best to make sure they're all indicted, whether they end up case thrown out, convicted, plead guilty, acquitted. I think he'll continue to pursue it because there's a school of thought. I don't know if Donald Trump created it or just subscribes to it, but a school of thought that says the only way to produce justice for what was the lawfare done against Republicans from 2017 to 2021 is to eye for an eye. That there's justice in these prosecutions because it's the only thing that will deter future Democratic presidents and prosecutors from going after MAGA.
Yeah, Joe, I want to get your thoughts on that. Now, I don't know how you feel about whether lawfare was practiced against Donald Trump in terms of, the various indictments, Bragg's prosecution, Tish's prosecution here in New York. But I want to get your thoughts on how we sort of stop this cycle of lawfare. This seems to just be a key issue right now because yes, Republicans are always arguing it's like, well, the Democrats do this, so we need to do it too because now the jackboot is on the other foot, and
Yeah, I
they
know.
just ignore all warnings that it's like, well, Democrats are just going to do this back to you, and they say, oh, well, they'll do that already, so we just have to do it now. How do we break the cycle?
I'm so annoyed that you're asking me to act positively at a moment when I really, really desire to speak negatively.
Then speak negatively, Joe.
Okay, let's go back to 2008,
Mhm.
2009, 2010. I know people who went to prison because they overstated the value of their home during the financial crisis slash mortgage crisis that ensued. You know, they quote unquote defrauded the bank, even though they were paying their mortgages in full and on time. They went to prison because prosecutors needed scalps, and there's such easy scalps to get.
Mhm.
So now let's go to Letitia in New York. It is
Letitia James, the Attorney
absolutely
General of
true.
New York.
It is absolutely true that she ran for election saying, I'm going to nail Donald Trump. There is no question about that. But what she got him on, which was the wildly understating the value of his properties, just basically lying about the value of his properties to get better deals from Deutsche Bank, was far, far, far worse than all these people who went to prison, some of which I knew personally. So when they call that lawfare, I kind of have a hard time with it. I think the Alvin Bragg thing was incredibly stupid, but I certainly don't think it was handed down by Joe Biden. Sandy Berger pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor for documents, taking classified documents,
Yeah, the
which
9/11
Trump,
documents they put in his socks.
which Trump took cartons of documents and put them in his stupid gold bathroom.
Yeah.
And then the idea that it's okay to try and overturn an election by calling up the Secretary of State in Georgia and say, find me 11,000 votes. That's okay. That's lawfare if you try to do anything about that. I have a hard time with it. I have a hard time with it.
So you're referring to the Fani Willis indictment, the Fulton County DA, her indictment of Donald Trump over his attempts to overturn the election. And that was, I think, early on, a lot of people in the press assumed it's like, if there is a ticket here that's going to take Donald Trump down, if there's a case here that's going to take Donald Trump down, it's going to be Fani Willis in Georgia. But that just fell apart
Because she was an idiot.
because, yeah, the prosecution had serious problems. But Joe, I think the amount of indictments that Donald Trump faced, I mean, you would admit that there was some lawfare against Donald Trump. Maybe not
But
handed
was
down
it
by Joe
directed?
Biden.
Okay, so
It doesn't
question
need to be
number one:
handed
was
down
it
by Joe
directed?
Biden.
Was it directed by Joe Biden, a man
Does
who
it
allowed
matter?
his own son to be prosecuted, although he
If a
eventually.
Democratic DA in New York City goes after goes after Donald Trump on, I don't even remember what the charges were, but this was not serious stuff.
It was
And
that was. I knew Democratic lawyers at the time who said this is only going to help Trump,
yeah,
and by God, it did.
yeah,
It most certainly did. It helped make him the Republican nominee again.
yeah,
Um, how do you stop
Helped
this? The way you
helped him
stop
win the
it
center
is somebody
election too.
says. The way you stop it is somebody says, "I'm not going to do this anymore." That will never, ever, ever be Donald Trump.
yeah.
Our colleague Eli Lake, has written brilliantly about how destroying a small norm then leads to destroying a bigger norm, leads to another bigger, yet bigger norm, and eventually people are killing themselves, as they did in the Roman Republic, and the fear is that whoever is our next president will, elevate this instead of diminishing it. And the only way it stops is if somebody says enough. And it's not going to be Trump. So who's it going to be?
Mark, I mean, do you agree with that assessment? Do you see anyone on the horizon who could step in and be like, you know what, we're done with this. We're actually reestablishing that norm, or is this just gone? Or are we just going to expect that this is just going to be a feature of American politics for the rest of the republic?
Well, it's been a feature for a while, and of course, if you go back to the founding of Republic, there were lots of politics of personal destruction and lawfare. I mean, it's not like a 20th or 21st century phenomenon, but it's certainly because of social media and digital. It's certainly since post Watergate. It's a horse of a different color, and it's extremely dangerous. And I think the main reason to be pessimistic is we had three straight two-term presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, all of whom put ending this kind of stuff central to their candidacies and their presidencies. All of them won 2 terms. First time we've had 3 straight two-term presidents since the founding of the republic. And yet each of them left office with the country more polarized and more lawfare than when they took over after 8 years. So I don't know what the dynamics are or dynamics would be exactly, or who the leader exactly would be. But I know the only way to think about trying to fix it is to do some pretty rigorous analysis of the incentive structure that exists now. Why is it in politicians' interest to do this? Because the vast majority of Americans, I believe, and I think the data is quite clear in this, they're not interested in that. They're not interested in lawfare. Polls show it's not very popular. So why do politicians do it even though it's unpopular? Because the bases love it. The bases demand it. So I think you got to figure out how you elevate the power of the center and of those not even on the center who don't want this. You got to figure out how to elevate their power. And I think if you do that, you could be optimistic that it could end.
Well, one of the things, Mark, it seems to me, is the implication of what you're saying is, as long as we're this polarized, lawfare is going to be a fact of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is pretty depressing. It's pretty depressing thought.
It works, except as you pointed out, it didn't work in the case of Trump. And one of my remedies to almost every one of these things is the media needs to be fair, right? One of the great things about the free press is you guys will call out Trump for this, but you called out the Democrats for it too. Too much of our media doesn't. They just are for the home team, whether that's the blue team or the red team. And I think you need to call it out. And if it's called out, the politicians have less of an incentive to do it. If you look at the press coverage of the 4 Trump indictments, and I disagree with Joe about probably every one in the way you characterize them, but the press rooted for those indictments, rooted for them, hoped they would stop Trump from winning. And that turned a lot of people against the Democrats, even if they didn't like Trump, because they thought that was unfair.
Can I sneak in here with one other thought?
Please.
I came to the free press. Um, I was a New York Times person, columnist, writer for 12, 13 years. And
Fabled. You left out the word fabled. You were fabled. Fabled New York Times columnist. Go
there you
ahead.
go.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
If only Andrew Rosenthal agreed with you. But um, I was a committed reader, and it was not until I came to the free press that the thought ever even occurred to me that something might be wrong with any of these prosecutions. And again, it was my colleague Eli Lake writing about Alvin Bragg that turned the light bulb on in my head. And it's like, oh, there is another way of looking at this. There are people who have different ideas about this. And, I now see this in a very, very different way, especially that one, although I'm still more liberal than not. And my point is just if you're on the left and your diet is the Times and the other liberal media who were, I agree with you entirely, Mark, we're rooting for this, not just on the op-ed pages, but also in the news pages. You just have no perception that there is another point of view here.
Yeah. Pains me, but it's true.
Because we're talking about the divisions in America right now, and this control that both parties' bases have over the party at this point, and the online radicalization that's gone on. And this was all really, these divisions were all laid bare by the assassination of Charlie Kirk earlier this month. A horrible moment. And I remember I was working that night. I didn't check my social media the next day, but there were people who I knew, acquaintances of mine, friends of mine, people I've spent a lot of time with, and they were not justifying the assassination, but they were walking right up to that line, talking about it's like, well, he did say this about guns. And then there's the famous misquote of him going around about black women. He said this, he said that, the implication being he had it coming. Some people were more forthright. They said, it's like, you know what, Charlie Kirk, I have no pity, I have no sympathy here. And there was an attempt, and I'm not sure how strong it is still at the moment, particularly after Jimmy Kimmel's reinstatement, but there was an effort you saw on social media to find not only public figures, but random people, police in South Carolina, things like that, who are posting on their Facebook page things that are not nice about Charlie Kirk and trying to get them fired. It was the right, fully embracing cancel culture in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before. And Mark, you've talked about this, and I want to just to get your kind of broad thoughts on this right-wing embrace of cancel culture and whether it can even work. Because on the left with cancel culture, I see liberals kind of have the commanding heights of our cultural institutions. And so, they can just, some actor on some TV show says, I'm not going to get the vaccine, and they get fired. This effort, this kind of ground up effort from Twitter and social media to get rid of public officials and also just kind of like normal people who have posted insensitive things about Charlie Kirk, I'm not sure it's going to be effective. It's certainly, to someone like me, a giant turnoff because I just don't like cancel culture, period. But Mark, I just want to get your thoughts on this, on righty cancel culture, how it differs from liberal cancel culture, and whether it could actually work in the way that it's intended, whether it can actually silence people and intimidate people as the cancel culture regime of 2020 did.
Right. All great questions. I mean, look, keeping in mind the distinction between what is and what ought to be, let me just describe what is. The use of government power to get people canceled is horrible. It's worse than letting the market decide, right?
You're talking about Jimmy Kimmel specifically.
Yeah, specifically Kimmel, but I'm also talking about the Biden administration in trying to intimidate and successfully intimidating the social media platforms.
Yes.
From writing things about the Hunter Biden laptop, from writing about COVID, And again, this is another case where the press's unfair treatment is keeping us from having a legitimate debate. Take the sum total of what's been written in the New York Times and the Washington Post about the FCC chair and Jimmy Kimmel, and with a negative slant, quoting people, this is an abuse of power. That took place over a week. Think about how many articles you've read in the New York Times and the Washington Post about the Biden administration's abuse of power, intimidating the social media platforms. How much? Far less, barely any. Even though you could argue that was far more egregious, in part because the FCC does have oversight because of licenses of these stations, whereas the Biden administration really has no statutory oversight over these social media platforms. So part of the issue is, once again, as was the case with our previous topic, the press has to cover it fairly. They need to be equally outraged about attempts to cancel people, right? Same thing, as they are on both sides. It's the same thing. You've read in the last week all these stories in the press, and Washington Post, New York Times especially, about how horrible it is that Republicans are organizing to get people fired. Did not read a lot of stories about how horrible it was the liberals were organizing to get people fired. That double standard really rubs people the wrong way. And again, it keeps us from having a serious conversation. I think that, what conservatives are saying, it's different. We're not canceling people for things they said a long time ago. We're canceling them for things they said now. I don't buy that as a distinction. I think in general, people should show more grace to people who make mistakes or have positions that they don't like. And they should say, I'm not going to destroy someone's life because I can do it because I have a really widespread Twitter following, or I know how to put pressure on the CEO of a company. I just don't think that's a thing that human beings should do to other human beings. And I don't see much of a difference in the efforts, except that the left has a more power to cancel people because they control the media, and the media played a huge role in left-wing cancellations.
Joe, I think you might take issue with some of that.
Hope not.
Yeah. Um, it, you know, first of all, there were a lot of people like me who didn't know that much about Charlie Kirk until he was assassinated, and then we started to learn things. And among the things that I found really admirable was um, his veneration of free speech and his willingness to say, I'm here to debate. That's what I'm all about. And so it bothered me tremendously when um, people on the right said, "Oh, so and so said something bad about Charlie Kirk, this teacher in some local school district. Let's get him fired." And sometimes they did get fired, which is also whatever horrible thing that person said. That's also an issue of free speech. And I was very happy. I mean, I don't agree with I think what Brendan Carr did was horrible, and just
I think it was horrible. I think it was horrible too.
it was it's it's hard to how he views this as part of his job is to be the tough guy on to make sure everybody everybody in the networks is more conservative than they want to be. It's just I'm glad I'm glad it turned out the way it turned out, because the pushback really sent a strong signal about what you can and cannot do as the head of the FCC, and uh, and what you can and cannot do as somebody who is a television personality. Um,
Amen.
it was a good outcome. I'll just stop there.
Yeah, and
Amen.
a lot of people on the right were outraged by the outcome, outraged that Jimmy Kimmel was back on the air. I just have to see. It's like obviously Bob Iger had nothing to do with getting Brendan Carr to do this, but what a publicity coup this was for Jimmy Kimmel, who's had middling ratings for years, and to be targeted like this by the FCC, just reminds us that free speech martyrs are where you find them. But it's good that he's back on the air. But we're still in this situation. It seems a bit like this country is a tinderbox. We might be entering a new age of assassinations. Um, we hadn't had a political assassination in a long time. There had been attempts on Jerry Ford's life. There's obviously an attempt on Ronald Reagan's life. But we had gone a long period where we did not see political assassinations. And now it seems like we might be entering one again, like we had in the late 1960s, which was a horrible time for America, a horrible time for the Republic. And, here at the Free Press, a big part of our mission right now is just trying to lower the temperature in this country. And, we're all about reasonable dialogue and disagreement. And that's the ideals that we're founded on. But I'm wondering, Mark, what can elected officials do? And is any elected official in particular standing out to you as someone who is really trying to depolarize this country a bit? It's fine that the Republicans and Democrats have strong disagreements, but when you get into lawfare, when you get into cancellations, when you get into political violence, which is horrifying and how countries end, who, if anyone, is doing a good job at trying to lower the temperature here? And what can we do, just as everyday Americans, to try and lower the temperature in this country?
Nobody's doing a particularly good job that I see. What needs to be done, and everyday Americans can contribute to this mightily. We need to change the incentive structure that rewards politicians who cater to the extremes with cable TV news contracts and book deals and attention and influence over the national town square. If you're angry, if you're amongst the angriest and loudest voices on the national town square, you are rewarded. So stop rewarding people for that behavior. Reward them for good governance, for being willing to look for common ground. Right now, the system doesn't reward that. It's amazing we have as many people who think about those things as we do because the system doesn't reward it. So I'm not optimistic about change in some individual way. I believe the path to change is to changing the incentives so that you are rewarded with better committee assignments, more wealth, more opportunity if you preach a different message than the one that prevails right now.
But how do you change that incentive structure? That's the big question.
Don't buy the books of people who are selling hate and division. Don't watch the cable TV news shows, people who are celebrating and profiting from hate and division. Vote in your primaries, if you vote in primaries, for candidates who say that they're more interested in bringing the country together than benefiting from tear us apart. Vote in the general election the same way. Give money and volunteer to candidates who say, I'll take any good idea that comes my way. I don't care what party thought of it.
But
Yeah,
you're really sort of saying here, the moderates need to take over from the base.
No, not the moderates. The people who are interested in not rewarding extreme behavior. That can be people who have far left or far right wing positions. They just have a different attitude about the kind of politicians they want to reward.
I will say on that note, I think Bernie Sanders' response to Kirk's assassination was really on point.
Yeah,
And
it was as good as anybody else's.
yeah, and Bernie Sanders, obviously the essential leader of the left wing of the Democratic Party. Joe, what are your thoughts here on just like ways to lower the temperature and ways to kind of come back from the brink in a country that increasingly resembles a tinderbox?
Well, on the tinderbox front, as we've written more than once in the Free Press, a lot of the shootings, not Charlie Kirk, but a lot of the other ones are motivated by nihilism and they're not necessarily politically oriented, and it's a societal problem that goes, actually, beyond. It's people looking at their screens all day and isolating themselves and not being a real part of society, and they're all the ways that kind of the culture has warped over the last 20 years or so. How do you reverse that? I'm not sure, but I do think it's reversible. I think I think there is going to be a great awakening um, about social interactions, and uh, you know, I have hope, though can't really say I know where that hope comes from.
We have a piece up today by Matthew Continetti, a columnist of ours, who's also at AEI. He talked about Chuck Schumer and how Chuck Schumer has taken a very hardline approach in these budget negotiations and have brought us essentially to the brink of a government shutdown. And in Continetti's opinion, this is going to be remembered not for any financial, economic reason, anything like that. This is going to be remembered just one small step in the transformation of the Democratic Party into a socialist party when a consummate deal maker like Chuck Schumer feels so much pressure from the base that he can't reach a deal with John Thune. Apparently, they're not even talking, according to the last report that I read. Thune and Schumer aren't talking, which kind of boggles the mind, the idea that the minority leader and the majority leader wouldn't be having regular conversations. Mark, why is Schumer doing this? How much of how much of the blame goes to him? How much of the blame goes to the Republicans? And come a year from now, come 2, 3, 4 years from now, is anyone going to care about this budget shutdown? I mean, this government shutdown, is it going to have any electoral impact, or is this just going to be quickly forgotten?
First of all, do you know what the media critic Pink said about Matthew Continetti?
The media critic Pink,
Yeah,
the singer Pink,
yeah. You know what she said about Matthew Continetti? Effing perfect. Effing perfect. That's what she said.
really?
No, not really, but she does have a song called that, and I apply it to my Matthew Continetti. He's a genius, that guy. Or Pink would say an effing genius.
He is yes, he's an
I just
astoundingly good
I,
columnist.
I just I just wanted to be on record as citing Pink and
We all love
praising
Matthew Continetti.
praising Matthew Continetti. In the
And
history of the free press, with the possible exception of the signing of U2, I think that's the best move they've made.
Well, we
You've made.
heartily agree.
Yeah, he's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Look, it's too soon to say what impact this is going to have because we don't know how it's going to end. I don't anticipate this to be epic. The problem that Chuck Schumer has, he caved once on this very issue not that long ago, and the base of the party in general right now has one feature in its job description. You know, if you're hiring somebody to like write a job description, you have like 10 different lines, and sometimes you think, well, we'll never find anybody who can do all 10 of these things. It's on my mind because we're trying to hire somebody two-way. There's only one job description. Help wanted, Democratic leader. You got to fight like heck to stand up to Donald Trump. That's it. So the only way to solve the impasse over government funding and avoid a shutdown is for Chuck Schumer to agree to let at least 10 Democrats vote for the Senate way out of this budget mess. And it's just a zero-sum thing. The same thing was true with Barack Obama. If Barack Obama was for it, Tea Party movement was against it. Even if Barack Obama was literally for something like the foundations of Obamacare that previously had been a Republican idea. That's the problem here now. It's not just that the parties disagree on the policy. It's very hard for Chuck Schumer to say to Democrats, vote for something that Donald Trump wants because it's in the interest of the country. And until that gets solved, I think that's the lesson. And whether it has an enduring place in American history will depend on how long it goes on for. And although I have both a Ouija board and a magic 8-ball sitting here on my desk, I do not know the answer to that question.
I was struck. I was struck in Matt's column about his memory of the original government shutdown that Ted Cruz manufactured. I remember as a business columnist that Moody's, I believe, downgraded America's debt out of fear of what that shutdown could do. And people were terrified that this was going to bring down the American economy. And as Matt points out, here we are at X number of shutdowns later, and it's such a ho-hum thing. It's almost like, oh, well, we're going to go through another shutdown. This is what we do. Federal workers will get laid off for a while, but then they'll come back and they'll get made whole, and we'll still be paying the debt and nothing to worry about. It's a Potemkin. It's a Potemkin shutdown. Is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, we've lived through so many of these, and we have survived. You try walking through a national park, maybe there'll be a sign up or something like that. You can't visit Grant's tomb, which is one of my favorite attractions in New York City. But other than that, I mean, life goes on, things continue. But Mark, I want to ask you, how much of Schumer's calculus right now is driven by the fact that he could be facing a primary challenge when he's up in 26, I believe, from AOC?
I thought you were going to ask me who is buried in Grant's tomb.
Who do you know the answer to that question?
Grant.
No, the answer is nobody. Nobody is buried
Nobody.
there. He's
Yeah,
entombed.
nobody.
He's above
Yeah,
ground.
yeah. Good question. Yep. Never mind. I was going to give you another one.
That's
Look,
the old Groucho Marx question. Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
I know Schumer has to worry about uh, uh, 28 when he's up for election, and where AOC might run against him. He can't, but I believe his mind is more focused on 26 because he'd like to be majority leader, and I think he thinks that if he's able to manufacture taking back the Senate, that he's less likely to be deposed by AOC. That she would be discouraged from running against a guy who just won the Senate majority back. And although it is a long shot that that could happen, it's less of a long shot than it was 5 months ago because of some developments in the Senate races that will determine the majority. In this
You're saying
case,
it's a long shot for the Democrats to reclaim the majority.
it's a longer shot, but it's a shorter long shot than it was 5 months ago because
Yeah.
of developments in North Carolina and in Maine and in Georgia and in Michigan. A lot of things have gone right for the Democrats. Again, I don't think they'll take the majority, but they could. And Schumer and Jeffries, the Senate House leader, their unwillingness to endorse Mondami is predicated on their belief that endorsing Mondami would hurt their chances of taking back the majority. And I think that is more driving Schumer's motivation right now on these issues than his own electoral odds in 3 years. Because if he doesn't fight with Trump, the base will protest, and he will lose the ability to be a credible leader for the party. He has to be in sync with what the party wants, which is fight Trump. If Trump says, I'm putting free root beer in all the water fountains, they have to say, it'll rot our teeth. It's a sop to the root beer manufacturers who are giving you campaign contributions. No root beer in the water fountains. That's just the nature of the party right now. And I love root beer.
How old will Schumer be in 2028?
It's old as dirt.
Exactly.
I think he'll be 79.
That's a kid by DC standards.
I might be
Well,
wrong about that.
by Chuck Grassley standards, that he's a kid for sure.
I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. How old will Chuck Schumer be in 2028?
Folks, you can only find this here. Mark Halperin asking ChatGPT about Chuck Schumer.
He'll be 78 in November of 28.
Oh, so you're youngin'. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know who his natural successor would be. Who in the Democratic Party could
within the Senate, or
within
for
the
the
Senate
state?
as it stands.
Well, this guy from Hawaii, Mr. Schatz, is going to be the number 2, and he I think people think will ascend. I'm not super impressed with him the way some people are. I'm not saying he's unimpressive, but first of all, being from Hawaii, I don't know how he's going to raise money, which is a big part of that job.
Right.
And go watch him on YouTube. See if you think he's got the chops to lead the party.
He's good on social media. He's good.
He's good on social media.
Yeah.
On social media. I just watch him on Sunday shows and on the floor, and I'm not blown away. But I think I am impressed. He played the inside game of being elected to be the heir apparent to Schumer 3 years or 2 years before the election. That's pretty good. It's pretty good to line up the votes in a contest like that.
And it's not that long of a flight from Honolulu to LA to raise that Hollywood money.
Yeah, but it's a long way to raise the money in Beacon Hill.
Fair enough. All right. Joe Nocera, any additional thoughts on the government shutdown or lowering the temperature or anything?
Well, I did want to ask Mark one last question. If Schumer were to retire in 2028,
yeah,
how would you evaluate him as the leader of the Senate Democrats for the duration of his time?
I think he was very strong until populism, pro-Palestinian, and Trump derangement syndrome became the guiding forces of the Democratic Party. I think whenever that was, I think he pivoted to someone who was a man out of his time and not nearly as effective. But I think his early days in that job, he was pretty effective.